Okay, also going to try live on Facebook. For those just joining us, we're just going to take a couple of minutes while more people arrive. And I figure out how to live stream on Facebook. Continue. Okay. Okay, we're going to give it another 2 minutes because there's still heaps more people to arrive.
Dorte, really quickly, I don't know if you saw my question, but if we're going to be covering off things like anaerobic digestion as well as waste to energy incineration, I've got another colleague I'm going to invite to join quickly.
Less so. I think we're probably mostly talking about municipal waste incineration. Any of the speakers, are you going to be talking about AD, anaerobic digestion in particular?
Or pyrolysis or others?
No, I will be touching on thermal waste incineration technologies, which include pyrolysis and gasification. Anaerobic digestion is a waste to energy technology, but it's a non-thermal technology. So that's why incineration doesn't include anaerobic digestion. But anaerobic digestion is most definitely a waste to energy technology.
Okay. I'm going to. All right. We are at 3 minutes past 5, so I think there'll probably be a few more people joining us. I have so far failed to get the live stream happening, but I'll figure that out maybe while we go. So yeah, just a huge welcome, everybody. I thought it would be useful to start, like it's a very common tradition in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and in respect of the wonderful and kind of rich traditions that Māori, who are the Indigenous people of this land, have given us. I thought we would open the session with a karakia. For those joining us from afar who might not know about this, it's a karakia is an opening acknowledgement, or it's sometimes called a prayer. For me, it's really a way of acknowledging that we're moving into a new space. So we've come together from all over the world. We've all got different headspaces, different things going on, and experience that we bring with us. So a karakia is a way to kind of mark the beginning of the session, mark that we're all kind of together for the session. So I will start with a karakia. He karakia tēnei. Unuhia te pō wharimarama. Tomo kia te ao whatu tangata. Tātai ki runga, tātai ki rau. Tātou ahurau, haumea hui e, tāi ki e. And just to kind of explain what that means, it was really saying there is lots of confusing things. If we come together, understanding will be had, and we are together and we are interwoven. So thank you for that. Welcome everybody. My name is Dorte Wray. I am the General Manager of the Zero Waste Network, and the Zero Waste Network is the host of today's session. So for those of you that don't know that much about the Zero Waste Network, because we've got lots of people from all over the place joining, I'm not assuming that you're all members of the Zero Waste Network. So I'm just going to kind of very, very quickly explain that the Zero Waste Network represents organisations across New Zealand who are working towards Zero Waste New Zealand. We've got lots of activities we do to support our members and also to promote the concept of zero waste. And one issue that we've become increasingly kind of aware of and active in is the issue of waste to energy. So we've been hosting the Regeneration, Not Incineration campaign for a couple of years now. That is a campaign that was developed in response to this kind of increasing interest in waste to energy, and in particular, it was set up to support local communities who are opposing waste to energy projects in their local area. So we know from that experience that there is real benefit in sharing ideas and experiences with others in similar positions. So we know that at a national level, we know that here in New Zealand, and this session is really about taking that idea that there's value in sharing experiences, and we're going to go take it global. So we have a number of guests here today. We have speakers from the Philippines, from Australia, from Malaysia, and from Thailand. And I'm just very, very grateful for all of our speakers for making the time to come. It is afternoon in New Zealand, but I think it is morning in various places from where you're joining us. So thank you very much. I am going to start. The session is about what's happening overseas and kind of what are the lessons that are being learned, what are the experiences of communities that may have waste to energy incinerators in their communities, and also that may be fighting those kinds of proposals from happening. However, I think it's probably really useful to just do a little bit of context setting. And so I am going to share a very, very quick presentation. And it is, all right, okay, it is here. Let me find the right one. Okay, this one, share. And hopefully, you guys seeing that? And I go slideshow and suddenly the magic happens. Yes, your thumbs up. Is anyone seeing it?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so this is my opening slide. Here is what I think is going to happen today. We're going to hear from me. Then we're going to move into our speakers from afar. We've got 3 or 4 speakers, and we've also got a video from Zero Waste Europe. And then we will just move into questions from the audience. So I am hoping that you guys use the chat function to put your questions in as they go. We may have the opportunity after each speaker to answer a couple of questions, but probably more than likely we'll need to move into kind of the next speaker, and then we'll leave questions for the end. So that is what I'm hoping will happen. We've got 2 hours. If we end early, that's fine. Let's just see how many questions there are from the floor. Okay, so I thought it would be really useful to just really quickly go over the Zero Waste Network's position on waste to energy. So we're a zero waste focused organisation. We follow the Zero Waste International Alliance definition of zero waste. That is written there. I think the important bit is they talk about it's being without burning and with no discharges to land, water or air that threaten the environment or human health. So it is our position that waste to energy incineration is incompatible with the idea of a circular economy, which is one of the things we are working towards. So this is another way of thinking about it. The waste hierarchy is is one of our kind of guiding ideas. We are particularly interested in the kind of reduction and resource recovery end of the waste hierarchy. We think that's where the most change is going to happen to get us towards a circular economy. And disposal is things like landfilling, which we have in New Zealand, and waste energy incineration, which we currently don't have in New Zealand. So the New Zealand context, this is super brief. So at the moment, there is some, but there is limited guidance for decision makers. So there is like a 13-page guidance document that was put out a few years ago from the Ministry for the Environment, and it does have some good principles in it. Mostly it considers waste to energy as a recovery, not disposal. And then in the very, very recently released waste strategy, waste to energy is talked about actually multiple times. I think I did a search and it's like 43 times or something. There's a couple of pages on waste to energy, and I think what's interesting is there is a shift. Sometimes waste to energy is being talked about as a disposal technology, but also sometimes it's being referred to as recovery. So going down to the third point, that New Zealand is late to the party on making the link between climate and waste, that is going to be quite important in terms of how, if it's considered recovery, then there are kind of conversations around energy and renewable energy that need to be happen. If it's considered as disposal, there's things that kick in around the waste levy. So we think that there's lots of important conversations, and there's still lots of, well, there's not a lot of clarity yet. The Waste Minimisation Act means that regional and local councils are responsible for consenting decisions. So some of these big decisions about waste to energy incinerators that would impact regions are being made at the local scale, for better or for worse. So currently there are 3 proposals around the country that are at different points in the consenting process. The next 5 slides, I'm just gonna, like, they're there because I think it might be interesting to some of you, but not all of you. So you can have a copy of this if you are interested, but they just kind of run through what each proposal looks like. One in Fielding, which is a pyrolysis plant, one in Waimate, which is an incinerator, and I think quite a big incinerator. Also Te Awamutu, an incinerator and a big one. So there is some more information. I'm not going to go into it. I'm not the expert on these, but that information is available if you want it. After working on these 3 proposals, we have kind of identified that there are some issues particular to New Zealand. One of them is around the cultural impacts of such proposals and around the implications for Te Tiriti or Waitangi. So given this conversation is about international perspectives, this stuff may only be slightly relevant, but it might be useful for other people to know. So that's why I've included these slides. And the last point is really that we've been noticing this kind of theme of greenwashing, the names that these projects have been given, the solutions that they are proposing in terms of calling things biosolids, we do not think are an accurate representation of the kind of harm or really the processes that are undertaking. So that is the very quick summary of the New Zealand context. But now I am hoping that we will move. I'm just going to check. Trish, are you online?
Hi, Dorte. Yes.
Hi, is Yobel joining us?
Yeah, I'm trying to get a hold of him.
Okay.
Maybe you can put the Zero Europe video,
Yeah.
and then I'll just update afterwards. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, thanks, Trish. Okay, so one of one of the things we thought about doing was getting Zero Waste Europe to come and talk to us, but the time difference is shocking. So it would be like 2 a.m. or something in the morning, and we just weren't going to get speakers. So instead, what we have done is we've borrowed a video that I think was produced for like a panel, maybe in the Philippines, but it is actually a very, very excellent short summary of the position and the position that the European Union is finding itself in. So I'm going to share that first. It's 5 minutes long. Optimize for video clip. Share.
Good day, honorable senators and champions who you are present today. Let me give special thanks to the office of Senator Loren Legarda, the Climate Change Commission and the Eco Waste Coalition, CAIA's member alliance in the Philippines. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share my views on the current discussion on the waste incineration field. We are very concerned about the prospect of building incinerators in the Philippines, and considering the importance that some actors in the area are giving to copying the European model, let me give you a fair picture of what is really happening in the European Union. Firstly, the European Commission makes it clear, incineration has no place in a circular economy. In fact, the European Commission communication in 2017 on waste to energy clearly indicated that priority to reduce the final disposal of waste must be on separate collection, in particular of organic matter and its composting and digestion, and not on incineration. The text also called for divestment in incineration. Since the communication, the EU has phased out all funding for waste incineration. This includes the regional and cohesion funds, just transition funds, as well as the recovery and resilience funds. In fact, the 850 billion euro COVID fund to support Europe's recovery from the economic crisis created by COVID made supporting waste incineration as an example of non-compliance. More recently, the EU has created a sustainable finance taxonomies with the aim to give clarity on private investments on what could be considered as sustainable and green finance in different economic areas. The first taxonomy on the climate change mitigation excluded waste incineration on the grounds that it harms one of the other environmental objectives, which is the transition towards a more circular economy. Also, last December, the EU institutions concerned about the growing CO2 emissions from incinerators, which have been doubling over the last decade, agreed that waste incinerators should be included in the European emission trading scheme from 2028, which would make the operators pay a carbon price for every ton of CO2 emissions emitted, and therefore disencouraging of putting waste or building new incinerators. I'd like to highlight that several regions and countries in Europe have already established goals to phase out waste incineration. Good examples being Scotland, Catalonia, and Wales that have recently put a moratorium on incineration capacities, and others such as Denmark or Walloon and Flanders regions in Belgium have set targets to reduce the amount of waste incinerated, including closing down incinerators. Let me also highlight that a very recent research on emissions of persistent organic pollutants in 5 countries, such as Belgium, France, Czech Republic, Lithuania, and Spain, found very high levels of contamination in the immediate surroundings of incinerators. For example, the analysis of chicken eggs sampled showed that the majority of eggs exceed the EU action limits for food safety. And if those eggs were intended for the commercial market, they had to be a bit prone. So from Zero Waste Europe, we invite those interested in good European practices to copy the systems and technologies that are operating in Europe in the framework of a circular economy, such as door-to-door collection models, the extended producer responsibility, or deposit and return systems for containers in the EU. As for mixed residue waste, then we recommend biological treatment to stabilize the organics and sorting to recover recyclables. All these European zero waste practices are cheaper, more flexible, also less polluting, more participatory, and generate more jobs than incineration. My final message is that the Philippines, you have the opportunity to take a leap towards zero waste, and you do not have to repeat the mistakes that we Europeans committed for you. We invite you to take advantage of it and to be careful and not fall into technologies and systems that in Europe are already part of the past, such as waste incineration. Thank you so much. I wish you all a good day.
You're on mute, Dorte.
Oh, good. Thank you.
You can
Okay.
tell I've done way too many Zoom webinars.
Yes, thanks, Jane. I was going to say, are you up for going next, Jane?
Sure.
Okay. Awesome. So I am going to introduce you guys to Jane Bremer, who is the chair of the Alliance for Clean Environment Australia. She's based in Western Australia and has worked for environmental health and justice for more than 20 years. Currently, the Zero Waste Australia campaign coordinator for the National Toxics Network, Jane works collaboratively with local, state, national and international NGOs, experts and researchers to resist incinerators and established zero waste models. Jane works to empower communities to defend their human right to clean air, water and soil through the through the principle of community right to know and access to independent science and expertise. She was awarded the Sunday Times Pride of Australia Medal for Environmental Activism in 2007. Welcome, Jane.
Thanks, Dorte. I'm just going to share my presentation. Go. Okay, I have a lot of slides, so I do tend to flick through them quite quickly. Happy to take questions whenever. So we know quite a bit about waste to energy incineration in Australia. We've been battling this sector, certainly in Western Australia, for at least 20 years. And I'm sad to say that Western Australia is leading the charge in terms of waste incinerators, having approved 2 major incinerators with the help of a lot of renewable energy funding from the federal and state governments. Now they're pushing heavily into every state on the East Coast, but I'm really happy to share with you that the campaigns on the East Coast of Australia in opposition to waste incineration is going really well, and there's a lot of lessons and support there for the New Zealand community, our allies in this campaign. So I want to start by framing the issue of waste and why that's so important for us to frame waste, because it shifts how we see waste, how we see zero waste policy, and how we can see the future of a circular economy. And if we look at our waste streams, what we're actually looking at is a window into our entire materials production systems. And so whether that's non-recyclable single-use plastics, e-waste, tyres, these are all major waste problems. What we see in our waste stream, and I'm predominantly talking about our residual waste stream, and many people understand what residual waste is. It's what we don't compost and recycle or remove from the waste stream. It goes into the red bin, it goes to landfill or for disposal. So we see a lot of wasted resources, but what we also see is the design failures in our materials production systems that we need to resolve. And if we don't look at our waste, particularly our residual waste, then we can't understand how to change this. If we hide them in landfill and incinerators or downcycled products, we're not actually going to change our systems to eliminate these problematic wastes, and we'll continue to keep making them. So yes, our waste is a resource and they are wasted resources, but they also tell us, our waste tells us that these are design failures that we need to fix. Dorte mentioned that I run the National Toxics Network Zero Waste Australia campaign, and we're very aligned with the international movement and have adopted the definition of zero waste from the Zero Waste International Alliance. We also have a much needed to be updated interactive map on our website where you can see some of the major incinerators. There's plenty more to add at them, unfortunately, a job that I will get around to. Why is this happening in Australia? And you'll see that there will be similar kinds of policy directions, I would imagine, in New Zealand. And one of the major shifts that has opened the door to waste incineration in Australia was the federal government's waste export ban, which was a great, globally first, very big announcement, but it was made in a political and policy vacuum, where we had no other avenues for our waste after many years of our state and federal governments adopting zero waste to landfill policy. Now, if we cut out landfill, where else is our residual waste going to go? And there opens the door for the waste incineration industry, who, by the way, were real leaders in championing the zero waste to landfill policy, knowing full well that it would open the door to incineration in a number of Australian states and federally. And unfortunately, the majority of policies that have been developed, I've gone back to about 2018, 2019 policies, they're all leading to three main outcomes, and that is waste incineration, the development of refuse-derived fuel to burn in incinerators and in other industrial combustion industries, and chemical recycling, which is sounds good, but is in fact leading to many incineration technologies such as, and particularly, pyrolysis and gasification, where we take plastic waste, we heat it without oxygen or maybe a bit of oxygen, and we turn it into a fuel to burn. The claim is they will use that to make new chemicals and plastics, but around the world this isn't happening. The majority of the output is going into fuel, and it's very dirty fuel, and it comes with big toxic air pollution and climate costs. Here's an example of how incinerators have really taken off in Australia through the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and the Australian Renewable Energy Authority, that for many years, up until just recently, the new Climate and Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, has agreed to remove all subsidies, but it didn't stop quite a few big ones getting through, and huge amounts of money went to these two incinerators in Western Australia, which I have to say haven't been built or finished yet, and certainly aren't operating, and have come up with huge financial and legal implications, which should be a big red flag for the New Zealand government. The West Australian government made the mistake of investing in these technologies. They haven't been built, they're not operating, and suddenly the pandemic hit. These incinerator projects are in the courts because they can't finish their building. They're not meeting the contracts that they made with the government, and it's become very messy, and the costs have blown out incredibly by $400 million. So for those who are not aware, there are three main types of incineration: mass combustion, which is a moving grate, where pretty much the waste is just loaded into a hopper. It rolls down the grate, it's burnt in the process. What falls through the grate is the bottom ash. What gets captured in the very expensive air pollution control equipment, which is the majority of a mass combustion incinerator and the most expensive components of it, that's the fly ash gets captured in there. And that's really what we've done, is we've taken municipal solid waste, we've transformed it into toxic air pollution and tons of highly toxic ash. Pyrolysis is a similar process, but just with small amount, with the absence of oxygen, and gasification uses small amounts of oxygen. But definitions matter, and the point I'm making here is that in the EU and the US, and this is really important for New Zealand campaigners to understand, is that all of these technologies are classified incineration technologies under EU and US regulation. And the point I'm making here is, when the incinerator industry comes to your town, the first thing they'll say is pyrolysis and gasification is not an incinerator technology. It's a U-Butte wonderful thing. This is not true. And these are the links to the legislation that the EU and the US have to define these technologies as incinerator technologies. Some call them two-stage incinerator technologies, where they take the waste, turn it into a gas, and then burn that gas for energy, rather than burning the waste for the energy, or to generate heat turbines and those kinds of things. At the end of the day, we're burning waste for energy, however you want to put it. So the EU, I won't go into this too much because I know Yannick covered it. So rid of that, I don't know if you see that. Right. This is important references for you. The EU, back in 2017, recommended to all their member states to shift away from incineration. They suggested that member states decommission old incinerators and set a moratorium up for new ones, recognising that waste to energy incineration was an impediment to the circular economy. Yannick mentioned the taxonomy, which is really significant because this is where waste incineration was classified in the same group as nuclear and coal, and renewable energy subsidies were removed, cementing the position in the EU that incineration was actually a climate threat and should not be funded as such. As I mentioned, in Western Australia, the only two incinerators that have really been approved and fast-tracked in Australia are in the courts. And as I said, the costs have blown out to more than $410 million to finish the project. West Australian government mistakenly relied on these plants as part of their electricity grid, and they've failed to deliver. So WA is in a bit of a difficult situation now. They shouldn't have put all their eggs in the waste to energy incineration basket. As we said, waste incinerators are a financial threat to local government and state governments. Why? Well, as we know, incinerators emit pollution, and quite a lot of toxic air pollution. These are the main gases that incinerators release to the atmosphere in quite large quantities. These also include micro and nanoparticles, and there's no real regulation around in existence for nanoparticles. And these are very concerning because nanoparticles pass the blood-brain barrier and go straight into the organs, and can cause serious health impacts. They travel around the globe. And that's why incinerators and their pollution, particularly persistent organic pollutants, are listed under the International Stockholm Convention for elimination. And this also includes unintentional generation of persistent organic pollutants, which refers to incinerators. Incinerators emit persistent organic pollutants either directly from the stack or as a result of those gases cooling down post the stack and generating dioxins in the process. So incinerators claim to be able to control all of their air emissions. This is not true. Some of the most deadly pollutants are formed outside of the stack. and are not actually part of the waste burning process. They're formed in the gases cooling down outside, and this is really significant. Australia is a signatory to the Stockholm Convention. I'm not sure about New Zealand, but that would be worth checking up. There are a lot of publications to support community groups such as yourselves to learn more about the dangers of the toxic ash. So for about every 4 tonnes of waste that's burnt in an incinerator, they produce about 1 tonne of ash, and the ash is full of toxic substances. So when your governments and your regulators and the industry talk about this wonderful ash that they're just going to reuse and recycle back into our circular economy, this is hazardous waste. And in Europe, it is treated as hazardous waste, buried deep in salt mines. In Western Australia, the ash from the incinerator proposals there will have to be trucked to a Class 5 hazardous landfill site, and is going to have to be treated with cement to contain it. So the ash is very significant. We know that it contains persistent organic pollutants like PFAS and microplastics. Yannick also mentioned some of the great work that's going on in Europe, taking a closer look at the pollution impacts around some of the world's most best operating incinerators. These are incinerators that exceed the EU's best available technology reference standards. So they go beyond that. And what their research found was that the monitoring that incinerator companies and regulators use are vastly underestimating the levels of dioxin that are being emitted from incinerators and found in the surrounding environment, and by quite an order. And so they recommend a more accurate method of measuring these persistent organic pollutants. Once you start to use the AMESA system, then you find quite significant, as they did, quite significant levels of dioxin in the surrounding environment, particularly being recorded in chicken eggs, but also in other produce, agricultural produce around the areas where incinerators are located. When it comes to human health impacts, there's no doubt here that the pollution from incinerators are serious threats to human health, whether that's the exposure to the ash or exposure to the air pollution. More recently in Australia, the Australian Public Health Association conducted one of the world's most conservative but systemic reviews. This was a meta-analysis of all of the health published peer-reviewed studies of the health impacts of waste incineration globally, and they were quite damning. But there are many, many more studies that show incineration pollution is a serious threat to human health. Why it's important for us to talk about this and compare what the industry says to the evidence and the global systemic review that Australian Public Health Association produced is because the industry is out in full force, definitely in Australia, and I suspect very much so that this will come to New Zealand, referring to the air pollution control. Here they call it the flue gas treatment residues, which would typically go to landfill as is or are stabilised in cement. And they're mostly inert substances, soluble salts that are harmless, dust that is inert. They're not talking about persistent organic pollutants and dioxin here. They play down the impacts of incineration. And I can't tell you how many times I've sat on conferences with the industry where they've openly stated to regulators, to local governments, to the community that incinerators emit clean air and are perfectly safe. It is criminal behaviour and should really be called out, and that's why it's so important for the zero waste community to stand up. What the Australian Public Health Association did point out very strongly is the impact that incinerators have on surrounding farmlands and the contamination of the food chain. And they recommend that incinerators not be located anywhere near food growing regions or close proximity to people, especially children who are disproportionately impacted by pollution, particularly incinerator pollution. And why are children disproportionately impacted? If you don't know and don't understand, children are not small adults. Their bodies don't behave the same way as adults when it comes to processing pollution. Their exposure opens them to interrupt fundamental windows of development. They inhale, ingest and absorb more pollution than adults. They have immature toxics elimination processes. And children nowadays are being born with a chemical body burden much higher than generations before us. Some examples of incineration pollution in Europe. I want to highlight the impacts in a town in Switzerland. Switzerland is a big incinerator area, and the impacts of their incinerators on a city called Lausanne are quite significant. What you'll hear is, oh, they're old incinerators, we've got new regulations now and everything's wonderful. Well, no, the new regulations from the EU were set more than 20 years ago now. These impacts that are being recorded in the Netherlands and in Lausanne and other parts around Europe cannot be fobbed off as poor regulations 20 years ago, while their industry has been operating for more than 20 years already with these upgraded best practice standards, which we know are already failing. In Lausanne, children can't play in the soil, they can't grow their food, they can't eat their eggs. These incinerators cause irreversible harm to the environment and to human health. They're also quite dangerous, being prone to catching on fire. There's a fantastic organisation in Czechoslovakia now, Arnica. Anyway, got a fantastic map of all of the incinerator fires all over Europe, and here's just an example of some of them. There's no social license for this industry in Australia. Every state has a campaign to oppose them. Some have been more successful than others, but clearly this is where the power of the campaign is. And I urge New Zealand to follow the grassroots, follow an environmental justice driven campaign. The passion, the power and the effectiveness will be found in the frontline communities, because they have the most at stake. It's their children, their future, their health, their tourism, their industries that are on the front line of the threat of incinerators. We know that they're the most expensive way to make energy and the most polluting way to make energy. So from an energy perspective, there is no doubt incinerators are not part of a circular economy. And for organisations like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, some of you may follow, that have been really leading on the concept of a circular economy, clearly identify incineration and landfill as leakage from the circular economy. Incinerators will never be part of the circular economy. Don't be fooled or misled by that. In Europe, we know that zero waste city models work, and here's some examples of European cities that are already implementing zero waste city models. They're more proven, effective, and they're already happening around the world. Just to end on some of my favourite, plastic packaging is the scourge of the planet at the moment, whether you're in the Asia Pacific region and dealing with dreadful plastic sachets and soft plastic wrapping. There's a crisis in Australia over soft plastic packaging, but there are alternatives and we need to go back to these, and these are really innovative and exciting, and mushrooms are is one of my favourite. Also wanted to add that Zero Waste Australia just last year commissioned a report by a very good consultancy known as Eunomia. We asked them to look at residual waste management in Australia. This is really important for New Zealand because the outcomes, I would imagine, would be very similar. We asked them to look at what was the best way to manage residual waste in Australia, and to give us the options. How does it impact air quality, climate, health? And so the outcome of our Eunomia report showed that waste incineration was the most expensive, had the highest costs for health, climate, and that the best option for Australia was landfill with full pre-treatment. And when people hear landfill, oh, we can't put anything in landfill. Actually, what makes landfill bad is the organics we put in landfill. that generate the methane gas. So pre-treatment would see the removal of organics, the stabilisation of that residual waste, finer, more detailed extraction of all the reusable and recyclable materials, and you can reduce that residual waste fraction right down to 10% or less of the municipal solid waste stream. I'm talking about an Australian model, but that would be similar for New Zealand. And that is the most cost effective in terms of climate, air quality and health costs. Incineration came out as the most expensive and threatening for all. And you can find this report and our media briefing paper on this and the webinar of that launch of this report on our website. We made recommendations from this report to our government to put a moratorium on waste incinerator projects, to remove all renewable energy subsidies, including those that are being funneled through the Recycling and Resource Recovery Infrastructure Fund, prioritise on proven zero waste models. And if I'm sure I'm speaking to the converted already, and you understand that the front end of any zero waste model, city model, is how we collect and source separate our waste. And that's where the attention needs to be, because if we really want to have a circular economy, we must have clean, secure waste resources to be able to do that. The days of the commingled recycling truck coming around, collecting all your recyclables, throwing it into the back of the truck, smashing the glass, contaminating the paper and the cardboard and all the plastic. Those days should be well and truly gone, because this is not how we provide the secure, clean waste streams for the circular economy that we need so urgently. We've got to create and invest in how we source separate our waste, and that involves how we collect it. We're asking the government to invest in anaerobic digestion. If they want to use our waste for energy, anaerobic digestion at least preserves the carbon that gets sequestered back into our biosphere, which is what we need to do, rather than taking all of our waste and burning it and putting it into our atmosphere as greenhouse gases. The carbon going to the atmosphere is the wrong place. We need to keep it and put it back into our biosphere where it's urgently needed. Landfill gas capture is really important as well. I'm not too sure about New Zealand, but there are plenty of landfills in Australia that don't have gas capture, and that's one way to really reduce the climate pollution from the waste sector. In terms of non-combustion technologies, there are options. So this narrative that there are only two options for residual waste, either landfill or incineration, is a false narrative. There are new technologies coming forward all the time. Gas-based chemical reduction is one of them. It's being used for hazardous waste, and it can be used for residual waste. Same with supercritical water oxidization. These are still in the investment stage, but these are the kinds of technologies we should be supporting and investing in, rather than in a proven polluter. You can find more about these kinds of technologies on the IPEN website, and that's their latest report on that. We also have our basic report that was written in 2013, but it's still as relevant today as it was then, and it includes a fact sheet. You can get these from our website. And really just the final word from Veolia, which is the biggest waste incineration corporation. They're a big global waste management company pushing heavily into Australia. And this is what they have to say. So I hope that my presentation today will help you challenge these kind of nonsensical statements from the heads of Veolia, who really want you to believe that there are no problematic air emissions or any impact on these soils, and their scientific evidence, which just does not exist. And I hope my presentation today helps you see that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, so interesting. Just what you said a few slides back about that research that you got done on landfill versus incineration, I think, and what you said about the relevance to New Zealand. I think why I'm so pleased to have you today is that I feel like New Zealand and Australia, for all of our fighting over things and our competition, I think that there are heaps of cultural similarities, and I agree that there does seem to be kind of freak out about landfill. So I was particularly interested in what you were saying about landfill.
Before you go on, Dorte, let me add, that was our report. Zero Waste Europe recently, only last week, commissioned another report from the same consultancy looking into one of the technologies, which I didn't go into, which is MRBT, which is mechanical recovery biological treatment. And they took a really close look at that technology, because that technology is being used in some places. And they found that that was a far better technology than incineration, and that sequestering the residue from an MRBT is perfectly safe to go in landfill compared to the impacts that incineration and other technologies. So the evidence is growing all the time, and you can find that, that new report on the Zero Waste Europe website as well. MRBT is one technology we're highly recommending to local government. It's cheaper, it's more effective, it's less polluting, and as the author of this report in Zero Waste Europe, he said it could be a global game changer. If they implemented MRBT around the world, we could drastically reduce the climate pollution from the waste sector. I think they're talking about 30% at least. Don't quote me on that, but check out the report. It's very, very good.
Awesome, thank you. I have one question, which was, I was noticing throughout the presentation who you represent, there is seems to be a strong toxics network in Australia, and I don't think we have one in New Zealand. And I was just wondering, is there other things that the toxics network are active on? Why is it that there is such a strong toxics network in Australia that maybe we don't, I'm just trying to understand why we don't have one here.
Oh, I think every country needs a toxics network, and I'd love to see us grow, because, well, we work on many things. So going right back, we have the fossil fuel industry. We understand the climate pollution, but the other more powerful arm, in my opinion, of the fossil fuel industry is the petrochemical arm of the fossil fuel industry. And that's where you'll find chemicals and plastics and pesticides and pharmaceuticals and a whole range of chemicals that are synthetic and are highly toxic to our planet. So incinerators have come under this, because incinerators are emitters of one of the most toxic substances on the planet, and they're one of the, I think they're the second biggest contributor of dioxin from all industry sectors. So incinerators are big generators of highly toxic substances. In effect, incinerators take our waste and transform that waste into highly toxic air pollutants and highly toxic ash, hazardous waste. So it's just a stepping stone to hazardous waste generation, with a whole load of wasted resources and toxic air pollution in the process. So we certainly work on many things: persistent organic pollutants like dioxins, pesticides, waste, chemicals, plastics, incineration. They all fall under the toxics umbrella.
Okay, thank you. There is a question which I think, it seems like the toxic ash is the main concern for waste to energy. I wonder if a technology was developed to deal with these toxic ash or other pollutants perfectly, then is waste to energy a good solution?
Well, absolutely not, because the ash from incineration is classified hazardous waste. You can't do anything with it. And if New Zealand is signatory to the Stockholm Convention, you won't be able to use it, and you shouldn't. You can't make hazardous waste safe, and that's why they're mixing it with cement to stop its hazardous state. So fine ash is highly hazardous in and of itself. It lifts, it exposes workers, it gets into the environment easily. It's a hazardous material in and of itself. Fly ash is everything, all the pollution captured. It's going to be the most toxic and hazardous part of the whole incineration process. So in Europe, they bury it deep in salt mines. In Western Australia, it's classified hazardous waste and cannot even be moved unless it's going to be mixed and containerized in cement. And even then, once it's put in the cement, it will have to be buried in a secure Class 5, which is the highest, class 5 is nuclear waste. Okay, they're in the same category as nuclear waste. It's not a solution to turn our waste into a highly hazardous and toxic waste stream. That's not a solution. We're just leaving that there for future generations to deal with. And I don't think we have a right to do that, especially while there are so many safer and more effective solutions.
Yeah, and I would also just like to add that kind of my understanding of the circular economy is that you're trying to keep things in circulation, right? You're trying to make things go around and around and around again, so that you don't need to keep going and mining more products to produce more. And incineration just stops that possibility. So you incinerate something, whether or not you had a perfect solution and no ash was created, which we've just heard is not going to happen, you still would need to go and mine more resources. And that's kind of the fundamental issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. I think
incinerators undermine the circular economy that are going to be and are the greatest impediment. And as I said, that's why Europe directed their member states to move away from incineration, because it was an impediment, and they can see it clearly as an impediment to the circular economy. But because the incineration industry in the global north has no future, where are they coming? They're heading to the global south. They're heading to Australia. They're heading to New Zealand. They're heading to Latin America, Africa, and the Asia Pacific region, you know, as every fossil fuel industry has and does. And that's incineration is actually part of the fossil fuel industry. It's the end of the line. It's the ultimate sink for fossil fuel materials, because I can tell you, it's not food and organic waste that's powering incinerators, it's plastic. So, and plastic is a fossil fuel. So we're burning plastic in incinerators to make really dirty energy and hazardous waste. It makes no sense. It makes no sense on any level.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Okay, we're going to move on. In setting up this webinar, what I was really interested in was starting to understand how other countries are dealing with incinerator proposals and some of the issues for communities that are near waste to energy facilities. So the next couple of speakers are going to dig into that a bit more. Our first speaker is from, now let me just get the Consumer Association of Penang in Malaysia, so that's CAP, and I'd really like to welcome Mageswari to come and speak. So Mageswari is a senior research officer at the Community and Environment section of Consumers Association of Penang in Malaysia. The group has been assisting communities fight incineration projects since 2000 and have been successful in quashing several mega incinerator projects. CAP is also promoting zero waste while objecting to policies that promote incineration. So welcome, Magus. Thank you for coming and joining us.
Hello everyone. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share our experience here in Malaysia. So can you see my presentation? Yeah, okay, all right. So I'll be talking to you about the promotion of waste to energy, or what we call here waste of energy plants in Malaysia, and also in terms of the evolution, yeah, from what they were planning from 2000 till now, what's been happening. Right, so next slide. Okay, so our first mega incinerator proposal was in 2000. Yeah, and this was a huge plant which had the capacity of 1,500 tons per day of municipal solid waste, which was using fluidized-based gasification technology. And this was proposed in Puchong in Kuala Lumpur, which is very close to the city center. Yeah, and once the community found out, they had protested. You can see the news clippings. Yeah, so wrong location for incinerator because it's in an urban area. Yeah, and you have to think about the residents and also a lot of things. Yeah, communities protested, and we also had experts from Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, Gaia, to look at the EIA and review and comment on the EIA. So we found a lot of issues with the EIA itself. Yeah, so it was our scientific assessment was done, and there were a lot of flaws. Yeah, and also the fluidized bed gasification technology that was going to be used based on Germany technology, it was also a failure. Yeah, in German itself, thermoselect or in Karlsruhe in Germany. So we used all that information, and then we protested, and we got the project. We wanted the project to be shelved, but what happened was it was shifted. Yeah, because this was from in a rural urban area, it was shifted to a rural area. Yeah, in the same state, but in a rural area where there was forest reserve and villages in that area. So the government thought, okay, the urbanites are very smart. They have all this support. Yeah, and so they have been protesting. So let's just move it to a rural area where they thought that nobody would protest. But then the community, because they were aware of the protests in the urban area, so they had contacted us again, Consumer Association of Penang, and we had also helped the community here. And there were also some professionals who were staying in that area. There were also villagers, and there were women there were very passionate about the area. They don't want their health to be jeopardized, yeah, due to these incinerators. So there were a lot of steps that we had taken, including working with IPEN with the project, yeah, International Pollutants Elimination Network. So we came up with a paper regarding the whole project, and there was also the IPEN's IPEP, we call it International Pollutants Elimination Project. Yeah, they had funded a video to be produced to tell the story of the community and why they are protesting. Okay, and the community also took the government to court. Yeah, saying this is so this was done, and after 4 years of protest and all that, finally the court found that, you know, the way the procedure was wrong. So we were victorious in court. Yeah, so this project was also shelved, and this was technology from Japan. And so since the EIA was done, payment has been issued, yeah, to the consultants. The company also had suffered, yeah, the one which was promoting the incinerator. So we don't know what happened, but we are sure that the Malaysian government had to pay compensation, yeah, to the company because their project was not mooted. Okay, so the next, after that, that proposal was also cancelled. What happened was another proposal came about in Kuala Lumpur, again in the city center, but this was in a landfill. Yeah, so this landfill was already the lifespan has expired, so they had proposed. So the government had now proposed again in Kuala Lumpur because you know, in the urban areas the amount of waste generated is really very high. So the government said we do not have enough landfill space. So this is what our work will do. So this also had a lot of protests from the communities. They started a group called Kuala Lumpur Takna Incinerator. Their Takna is meaning we reject incinerator, yeah, so anti-incinerator groups by the communities. And there were a lot of actions also taken. They had rallies. They also had a walk to the parliament to submit the memorandum. And we also had Gaia, the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, staff and also activists who helped in our protests. So there were a lot of things here that was done. And finally, this was also later on cancelled. Since this mega incinerator projects, which is like 1,500 tons per day capacity, has been rejected. So the government came up with smaller incinerator projects. Yeah, so this would be probably this one from 20 to 50 tons or 100 ton capacity incinerators. So these were proposed on islands and highlands. Yeah, you can see it from the pictures here. Yeah, there is one incinerator in Pulau Tioman. Tioman is a really beautiful island, but you can see in front of the incinerator or surrounding the incinerators, all this waste that has been collected is just dumped. Yeah, another one is also in Langkawi. It's also another popular tourist resort, there's also a lot of rubbish. Yeah, there will be, and what the government has been doing is place the new incinerator projects on landfills. Yeah, people see that it is so smelly, and also there's a lot of pests around the landfill area. And if it's in a small island, you know, people will be passing by the landfills. So when the project comes about, incinerator project, so people are convinced, oh yeah, this might solve our problems. And so this is what is actually happening. Then they also proposed an incinerator project on a highland. Yeah, this highland also is very popular as a tourist resort, but then most importantly, it is also a food producing area. Yeah, a lot of vegetables, tea is grown on the highlands, and you can see the smoke. Yeah, on the picture on your left, smoke from the chimney stack. What was happening was all these incinerators were built, but it did not function properly. Yeah, most of it was like abandoned for a while, or it needed a lot of diesel, you know, to run the incinerators. It was supposed to be like also produce energy, but it wasn't really. And there was also and those particular incinerators, they were only you know, it was from a lab test. Yeah, from so, and it was not in a real world situation. And they had not tested it. So there was an audit report by the Malaysian government. Auditors, you know, the incinerator project was a lab test and it was not functioning. Yeah. So we did protest the one on the highland, but the environmental impact assessment report was still placed. So as I mentioned just now, another one of the incinerator plants in Kepong in Kuala Lumpur, that was rejected. Yeah, because, you know, it's still another in an urban area, because the communities were worried about the emissions. Yeah, as someone had mentioned, if we have proper technology and all the air pollution control technology, but whatever it is, you can only, it's not everything is trapped by the bag filter or everything. So there would still be emissions from the incinerators, and these are toxic emissions, as Jane had already pointed out. So then what the government came up with is plans to build one incinerator in each state, and they call it waste to energy. Yeah, so that to convince people, you know, no, so we are burning waste and we're also getting energy, so that they would think that people would fall for it. Yeah, but then there are still protests. So this is another waste to energy plant, which was being also planned on a hill. Yeah, you can see the highlands there, but this was also on a hill. It is really a very steep hill. So you just imagine bringing tons of waste to a hill. And right now this is being used as a landfill, which the committee had protested, but there was, we failed in that protest. So what the committee is doing now is also had taken the government to court, but we had failed in this instance. So there was still a lot of protests going on, and until now, the plant has not been set up because due to the community protests. So what we feel is important is communities to continue protesting. Yes, since 2000 till now, we do not have mega incinerator projects in Malaysia due to community protests and also NGOs giving our comments to the environmental impact assessment reports. Yeah, so I will talk to you about what's happening now. So there is one waste to energy plant which is being constructed, that is in Jeram. This was the EIA of this report was issued during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we were on a lockdown, we were not able to visit the communities to talk to them about the health impacts. So what we had done, we have Malaysian Anti-Incinerator Alliance. We had commented on the EIA report, but then finally it was still approved, and the construction is going on now. And as I mentioned, the government will build it on landfills, yeah, dirty landfills, smelly landfills, so people are not protesting because it's already on the landfill. Yeah, and also another issue that we are looking into is waste to energy plants, which are being proposed in waste recycling plants. Yeah, so we are importing paper, paper waste, also plastic waste. So this waste, there are residuals from this recycling processes. So what is happening is the companies are building small incinerators in the plant itself, and they call it waste to energy plants. So these are some of the projects that is coming up right now. And there's also another proposal to burn, we call it burn, to burn scheduled waste. So scheduled waste in Malaysia is actually hazardous waste. So this is also very dangerous. Proposed recycle pulp and paper plants, there are also incinerators in them. So what we are doing is we are commenting on the environmental impact assessment reports, but finally what happens is, because these are industrial waste to energy plants, it still gets approved by the government, although communities are protesting. Okay, so what I would like to explain, and Trish had also put up the resources from Gaia. We have been using Gaia's fact sheets to use it as for our campaigns. We have a lot of information from these fact sheets and we are using it. And what is important is for us to have like a policy, no burn policy, no waste to energy policy, and this is what we are looking into. And at the same time, we are also have plans and actions taken in terms of moving towards zero waste, so that we do not need to build more incinerators in Malaysia. Okay, so thank you. So if you have any questions, I can do them. Thank you.
Thank you. Super interesting. I have a question. So it sounded like lots, if not all of the proposals were at least supported by the government, or are they are coming from the government? Can you explain that a bit? Oh, maybe you're muted yourself.
In terms of the waste incinerator proposals, most of it is produced by the government. They proposed by the government.
So how, because are there commercial interests that would be involved, or would it be, where is the money coming from and things like that?
So so the previous two incinerators which I had said from Japan, so the money was coming from JBIC or JICA at that time. So what they do is like they will come and do a study in terms of waste management in Malaysia, and then they come up with this idea, you need to have an incinerator. So that is why the Japanese companies were involved. So, and then right now in the Asia itself, we are campaigning against ADB, the Asian Development Bank, and also other Chinese banks, which might be also, funding these incinerator projects. So we are working with Gaia on these issues.
Yeah, so that's super interesting, because my understanding is that some of the New Zealand proposals also have some similar funders to some other proposals. So it seems like there's a bunch of companies that go, and in this case, it sounds like they go and they sell the idea to the government, the Malaysian government, who then goes, okay, we'll do this thing. But there are these really interesting links, money links that tend to go back to a few places, and that is very, very kind of fascinating and also kind of worrying to me. I also wanted to just touch on something that you mentioned at the very end there that I think is really interesting for a country like New Zealand. We're very small, and we have been relying a lot on international markets for our sending our kind of waste resources, our waste commodities away. And so you mentioned one of them was around imports,
Yes.
some kind of residual from getting waste imports. I'm not sure exactly what my question is, but I wonder if there is also like a social justice angle that other countries need to be taking responsibility for. If we're sending out, like we could very well be sending, parts of our waste stream to Malaysia, and is it on New Zealand to actually be fighting your fights too, because it is us that is producing the waste?
Yes, Malaysia was the top recipient of waste, plastic waste. after China closed its doors in 2018. And so we pushed back, and some of the waste was coming from New Zealand also. Yeah, so that is in the form of plastic waste. And there was also waste from Australia, which was coming in the form of tire scraps and residual RDF, refuse derived fuel. So we had also tried to put a stop on that. So we are no longer getting RDFs from Australia. And also in terms of Europe was also a major exporter of waste. So there was a campaign which was led by Malaysian NGOs. We are also part of the Malaysian Stop Waste Trade Coalition. What the Europeans are doing now is the European Parliament has also agreed not to export waste. Yeah, but then what we are saying is it may not be in the form of plastic waste, but there is also contamination of there could be plastics in our paper waste that is being sent. So there could be residuals of like maybe 20 to 30% of plastics or other residuals in the paper waste, but that is being incinerated at the recycling plants itself. So this is also still a major issue that we're looking into. And also in terms of electronic waste, although we are not allowed, Malaysia has a ban on imports of electronic waste, but there's also plastic content in the electronic waste that is still coming in. Okay.
Wow. Well, thank you for all of the work you're doing. I think there was a possibly very simple question, which was, what was the proposed technology in the Penang project?
Not in Penang. This was fluidized bed gasification in terms of the huge incinerators that were proposed.
Gasification.
Gasification. Yes.
Okay.
And there were also pyrolysis that is being promoted, small scale pyrolysis, and we have very bad Malaysian companies that is also going elsewhere selling their pyrolysis technology, and we have found that this is also very dangerous.
Yeah. So there's been a couple of questions about pyrolysis, and so I'm not asking you to answer these questions, but I think it's a very complicated technology. Pyrolysis is I can't explain it. I just attended a presentation with a guy from one of our members, Charbro, who is really interested in biochar, and he did a very, very, very good explanation of what pyrolysis is. And I think the feedstock really is the key thing to whether pyrolysis is kind of good or bad. And so in the New Zealand context, we have a lot of timber. We've got a big timber industry. I just want to say that I think there is a kind of a separate kind of conversation about pyrolysis that probably we need to have, and I don't think it's today's thing, but just acknowledging the questions that have been coming through and that are Jane, please.
I just jump in and say, I just need to remind everyone about the pyrolysis industry. Who is the pyrolysis industry? Where did it come from? The pyrolysis industry is the coal industry. Pyrolysis technology is not a new technology. It was developed by the coal industry decades and decades ago. It's dragging it out now as a new, clean, renewable energy solution to wood waste, a solution for everything. It's not. It's an incineration technology, as I demonstrated to you, defined and classified as incineration technology everywhere else in the world, except Australia and New Zealand. And it's really got a foothold in Western Australia as well, but it's not a solution for wood. And we have to remember, if you can collect wood waste, then you can always do something better with it than burn it or pyrolyze it into fuel. And biochar is a controversial issue. Biochar is not terra preta. It hopes to be terra preta, but it's not. And dioxins do transfer into the biochar. So biochar is not, the issue of biochar is being used to obfuscate what's really going on with the pyrolysis. And there's a lot of problems with biochar too. It's no solution. You know, in some practices, if you've got nice, clean fuel stocks, then maybe. But at some point, that biochar in the environment saturates. Biochar absorbs chemicals from out of the soil, and it reaches a saturation point, at which point it then re-releases those contaminants back into the environment. So it's a very complex issue, and establish an incineration
Thank you, Jane. You got fuzzy at the end there, but thank you very much. Okay, thank you, my guest. That was really, really, really useful. Thank you so much. We'll move on to our final speaker today. So now I'll just get my thing ready. Okay, so Punyaton, who has told me I'm allowed to use his nickname because it's quite a hard name, so we're going to call him Arm today. It's a nice, easy nickname. Is from the Ecological Alert and Recovery Thailand, or Earth Thailand. And he has been the Information and Communications Officer of Earth since 2021. He began working as a volunteer of Earth in 2020, and between 2017 and 2021, he studied social science. Oh my gosh, at Mahidol University International College with a minor in psychology, and he's also worked as a research assistant. So welcome. I really appreciate you being here. Are you all good to share your screen?
Yes, thank you, Dorte. So I'm just going to share my screen right now.
Perfect. Yep.
Can everyone see it?
Yes, it's the PowerPoint version. Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. And I'm going to be talking about the environmental and social impacts of waste to energy in Thailand. So first, a bit of an introduction to Earth. We are an environmental NGO which focuses on monitoring of industrial pollution. We work a lot with communities that are directly affected by toxic waste, mismanagement of industrial pollution. We focus on citizen science and environmental justice, meaning that we try to extend knowledge to the locals on how to monitor pollution issues. So we have a lot of experience working with locals and municipal authorities, many of which are opposed to RDF plans, and we'll look into why now. So first, just a short thing about the waste to energy policies in Thailand. Thailand has long has a waste management problem, and it's always been a question of how to solve it. In 2014, a massive fire kind of broke out at this big waste landfill in Samut Prakan province. And that led to a big outcry among in the nation, and that led to the government, which at the time had just been taken over by the military in the coup d'etat. And so it was a very confusing time, but the military basically had to listen and had to decide to make municipal waste a national agenda. So under the military government, the immediate solution that they came up with to solve was, let's do waste to energy, because it solved both the waste management crisis and the energy security crisis, according to them. And this was materialized in the form of the Power Development Plan in 2015 and the Alternative Energy Development Plan in 2015. And as well as also, I didn't put it here, but the Waste Management Plan also describes very clearly that incineration for energy is a possible solution to the municipal waste crisis. Now, it was already clear to the CSOs from the beginning that there was very little mentioning of waste sorting and having a proper system of waste management, but we'll get to that. So this is the quote from General Prayut Chan-o-cha, who was the military prime minister of Thailand, who took power via a coup. He told the civil society, please support this. If you oppose and don't let your area be used for the development of RDF, then where else are we going to put this waste? And he also mentioned that using them to produce electricity, then it will be circular. So this is the definition of circular in the view of the government, which was to make waste into energy. And again, the government then after 2014 really made a big push for municipal waste incineration in RDF. First, they made this really problematic law to change the law and ensure that all RDF facilities in whatever size, however megawatt of production, does not have to do any environmental impact assessment. So CSOs immediately sued the government, saying that you have changed the law illegally, you haven't conducted any public hearing. And last year, we lost the lawsuit. So right now in Thailand, any waste to energy factories of whatever size does not have to do an EIA process. It's also exempted from urban planning, not only for RDF, but any recycling factories, any biogas factories, cement kilns, anything that is related to management of municipal waste, or any power plants mentioned in the previously mentioned power plan does not have to follow the urban plans. And since then, we have seen waste to energy factories popping up right next to villages, housing estates, local areas. So since 2014, that's been the situation. Yes, so I've already mentioned this, and most importantly, there's an increase in what we call the feed-in tariff, which is government subsidies to guarantee the investment for waste-to-energy factories. The increase of waste feed-in tariff is so high that so we are trying to look into the data now, but there have been suggestions that it is about as high as in Europe, which is ridiculous because the population of Thailand, our GDP is much less than Europe, and with higher feed-in tariff, that means the electricity price increase, even though to be as much as the Europeans, even though our population have a much lower income. But in any case, by June 2021, Thailand has at least 44 MSW power plant in operation. In one particular sub-district, there are 2 big WTE power plants with the combined production capacity of almost more than 200 megawatts. So, and plus 5 other cement kilns as well. So in 2020, we see, like, for example, the Krabi Island here, that's a tourist destination. In order to manage the municipal waste in the island, a project was put forward to build this RDF plant. This is from the website of the company itself. So you can see the lack of urban plan, the lack of EIA has created this kind of situation where RDF plants are just situated right in the middle of a forest area and a tourist destination at that. Another case here, this is in Bangkok City, the capital city of Thailand. This is also constructed around 2019, 2020, benefited from the legal exemption mentioned before. And you can see that it's right next to our housing estate and right next to some local canals. And this has yielded big problems. We'll talk about this later, as this case has been a big issue, and the factory has had to stop many times because of complaints from the housing estates. And the problem grew even further after COP 2026, the Glasgow conference, climate change conference, when General Prayut then made a promise that we will achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Back at home, carbon neutrality would be achieved by increasing waste to energy project, because that is defined as circular and carbon neutral. So yes, the power development plan in 2022 saw the increase in waste to energy subsidies and plan. So yeah, since then, we've also seen more and more growth of waste to energy factories, to the point that in one news article we found in 2021, the Ministry of Interior says that Thailand has 77 provinces, and each province would have 1 waste to energy plant to fulfill the carbon neutrality goal. There's also an issue of, we'll now move to the insufficient regulation. We've already talked about the problem of legal exemption for EIA and urban plan, but there are also regulations that are clearly missing while Thailand is pushing forward for waste incineration. So this is just an overview. I'll go through each of them bit by bit. First, the proper definition of RDF. Thailand has no official definition of RDF, and SRF, which is solid recovery field, and PEF, process engineer field, is used interchangeably. There's no industrial standards for production or quality of RDF, no regulation on its movement, no industrial point source emission that includes dioxin. And we are having issues with the fact that hazardous ash might not be properly managed. And we'll go through first the industrial standards. The important thing about having a standard for RDF is that you need to know how much moisture content or biomass content or certain contaminants are in there. Because, for example, if you have high moisture in an RDF plant, meaning like you have a lot of organic waste mixed in, no proper waste separation, then the temperature would be too low and you have incomplete combustion. And at that point, you have persistent organic pollutants like dioxin. Now, Thailand actually have a pollution control department notification on this, but if you look clearly at the law, you realize that the pollution control department has no power to regulate factories. So this notification is useless. Meaning at the time, there is no regulation. RDF plants can just basically, technically, they could just basically dump just pure waste into the RDF plant and it would be okay. Of course, there are like certain caveats to it, like you have to follow specific regulations inside the permit, but there's no regulation on what has to be inside the permit. So that's more rooms for like exemption and legal problems. There's also an issue with movement of RDF, and we see this in practice when we were in a meeting about locals. Locals were complaining about one particular RDF plant that promised that they were going to take the waste from another municipality and then use it to produce energy for this other municipality. And then locals were asking, are you only just bringing waste from that one municipality? Because the small waste than it seems to be. But then when we ask for the manifest document for the movement of RDF, it's unclear who's supposed to be producing it. Is it the factory or is it the municipality? And when we look at it, the issue all comes down to the fact that if you define RDF as municipal waste, then the power falls under the municipality who's in charge of waste management. If you define it as fuel or waste, then that falls under industrial agencies. But since there's no clear law to denote this, no one is taking responsibility for movement. And what we're worried about is that unregulated movement means that it's hard to track the origin of RDF. So it's hard to track then the production and quality of the RDF. It is also creating risk for illegal dumping because now we don't know who is the origin. Is it the municipality? Is it the recycling factory? And we can't track if the waste that comes out from A is equal to the destination B, for example, and if it has spilled along the way. Finally, we have to talk about the dioxin emission. RDF plants are known for being a potential source of dioxin. And one of the documents we got from the Pollution Control Department says that the burning has to be around 850 to 1000 degrees Celsius for dioxin to be destroyed completely. Even then, I don't know if 1000 degrees Celsius is complete destruction. My suspicion is that it doesn't completely destroy. But even then, the issue is Thailand doesn't even have an emission standard for dioxin. And this has led to some issue because, of course, our waste has a lot of moisture content, has a lot of biomass content. This is because we have a poor system of initial separation. We don't have a clear circular economy. So out here in Thailand, if you walk on the streets, you can just see like rubbish being filled up with waste of different types, unsorted, unseparated. So if RDFs are wet, then it burns. It doesn't completely burn, then dioxin is created. I'm not going to go through this entire thing, but it's very funny to see this in practice because there is actually a dioxin emission standard for waste incinerator that came out in 2010. But RDF power plant doesn't follow this. They follow the Ministry of Industry emission standard that came out in 2006. And again, this is a problem of separation of authority where factories follow the Ministry of Industry standard, which as it turns out does not have dioxin. It only has like nitrous oxide and sulfur dioxide and some other heavy metal in there. And we also find out that there is actually no regulation that specifically mentions RDF plant. There is one that mentions municipal waste incinerator, which we think is closest. But for the Ministry of Industry, they actually use the same standard for the RDF plant as the one they use for biomass power plant, which is ridiculous. And that's a big issue that we have. We also want to talk about the fact that burning of RDF, of course, produces ash. And the issue in Thailand is that we have a big issue of mismanagement and dumping of hazardous waste. It's been a big issue for the past 2 years. Just recently, last week, one factory that has illegally buried some hazardous waste in a forest area was called to pay up 165 million baht for damage. And that's just one case among 5-6 other cases we've seen in the last few years. Now, we don't know because we don't know for sure if ashes such as these come from power plant or from other sources. Because the Ministry of Industry has also been having trouble tracking and caching all these things. What we do know, however, is that we have cases like this where in the middle of a kind of natural residential area, you have waste being dumped right there. And then, so in 2022, Earth and Arnica Association, which has been mentioned, great organization from Czech, with a lot of expertise in POPs and persistent organic pollutants, took some samples in an area that is affected by a hazardous waste dump site. And we found high level of POPs in soil dust and duck eggs as well. So that was a big concern for us. We also have heard cases from locals living near power plants that some power plants would just take the ashes that they have and then give it to locals for free and say that that's fertilizer. So some locals have used it as a fertilizer before. Sometimes they give to locals in a way that they can't refuse, meaning that they just pour it in front of their homes and basically say that that's kind of a CSR project. So just to talk a bit about the environmental impact, a fly overview of like dioxin's effects on reproductive system, effect on immune system, or risk of developing cancer, and serious effect on newborn. So certain types of dioxin have been regarded as a type 1 carcinogen according to the International Agency for Research on Cancer. A short case of the Nong Bua group in Nakhon Sawan province, which is around in western Thailand. This factory established an RDF factory right in the middle of a community zone and very close to a national park. Initially, they said they were going to be a biomass factory, but then all of a sudden they sneakily changed it to an RDF factory without going through proper processes. Locals filed a lawsuit against them for them to change it to stop their actions, but I think it seems that the case is still in appeal courts and it's not decided. So last time we went to a meeting with the locals and the company. It was a district level meeting where locals were complaining about this issue. Here are some pictures of the locals there. And one of the issues that locals were saying that we're having really bad foul smell, the kind of smell that make them unable to just come out and work. And the company admitted that, it's because the waste that we receive are so wet and so filled with moisture content that we have to leave it outside to dry before they put it in the incinerator. So that's an issue, because when we don't have proper waste management system at the municipal level or at the level of the national level, the waste that is going into these plants, even if at least they're not throwing like wet waste into the incinerator, but now they have to put it and dry it out in the open, causing severe effects. The locals here there have been protest movement in these areas. Some locals have been sued by the factory for defamation. It's caused a serious social rift and social conflict within the community. We mentioned this already. This is in Bangkok. Because it is in Bangkok city, you're dealing with more affluent group because it's the capital city. So this group of locals have had more of an impact or success in calling for this. It's the same issue. The company puts waste and try to dry it out in the open, but then because of that reason, it causes severe bad smell. So the locals start opposing it. And now currently the company has stopped operation and has been stopping operation for many months now. And it means that the waste from Bangkok city has been also piling up and have nowhere to go. So this is another example of where this company started out and they say that they have a German technology, but German technology may not fit with the kind of waste we find in Thailand. So you have to make sure that when companies say this kind of thing, if they are actually in fitting with what kind of waste we're dealing with. So again, to reiterate, the lack of EIA process means that communities don't feel like their voice is represented. So when RDF factories come up, they feel like they oppose it because they don't get any participation. And yet the government is pushing hard to build more and more RDF factories. Since 2015 until now, which is the start of the big RDF push, there have been nearly 50 cases of communities opposing WTE factories. That is a huge and serious social conflict issue that has been caused by a push to WTE without proper consideration. Many cases actually talk about lack of participation, lack of transparency, some because the money behind the factories are high. Locals have been intimidated. There are tactics used to suppress dissent. So that's caused even more distrust. I want to conclude with talking about what it means to actually be truly circular in terms of circular economy. We might say to an extent that waste burning is necessary if we have to say that in the case of Thailand because of the lack of technology. But I think in the case of Thailand, especially, the government overestimate the need for the waste to energy. And it also means that because there are a lot of big money behind waste to energy, the government is basically kicking the money that way. Again, we have too much subsidies to WTE, and now we have high electricity prices, much more than a lot of us can take on. I have been trying to live without an aircon for a while because of high electricity prices here in recent months. There's also a question of dioxins poisoning the circular economy. Without proper regulations of emission, then what you have is basically a poisonous circular economy, and that's not true circular. Also, social conflicts generated by lack of proper process mean that the public lose trust in the circular economy as a whole. So again, you need proper processes for this. I think the worst part about waste to energy currently is that it does create a false narrative that waste can always be destroyed and turned into energy. That's kind of the way that they say it, because waste becomes energy, so then you can just produce more and more waste, right? It disincentivizes the reduction of waste production, disincentivizes reusing. And again, I want to just reiterate the waste hierarchy, that the most important thing is reduction and reusing at the source. energy recovery is much lower down the line, as well as treatment and disposal. So we want to make sure that that is where every government in the world is going, not just blindly supporting any waste to energy plant. Thank you very much for your attention. And here are some of our websites and Facebook page if you want to follow us. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. That's well, it's kind of shocking. I feel all sorts of things. One thing that I feel like is true for Thailand and probably true for New Zealand is that without clear definitions, things can go all sorts of ways. And so we, I think, are experiencing an issue with understanding whether waste to energy incineration is recovery or disposal, because that will have very significant consequences for like how much it costs to send something to an incinerator versus to the landfill, and that all still needs to be worked out, it seems to me. But I wanted to ask you a question about, I guess, some of the conflicts, and you mentioned you had a slide in Bangkok a couple of times, and you said in the second slide that it was in a more affluent area, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about if there was any relationship between the communities that these places, that these technologies are situated, and the kind of demographics that exist where those places are. Is it a choice to send things, to set these things up where communities are poor in general? Like, what is the kind of relationship between the demographics and the siting of these sites?
Yeah, so the case of like this case of Onut, where you have a more affluent community, is a rare case, and that's because there are 3 big RDF plants in Bangkok, and it's meant to just take care of the Bangkok's waste, because of course Bangkok produces a high amount of waste. This is a very rare case, and I think that's why the company has faced a lot of opposition, because of course with more affluent community they have more power to deal with. But yeah, a lot of RDF plants that we see, most of them are relegated to to agricultural communities, poorer communities. We have had one of the key arguments that a lot of communities were saying is that so RDF plants, why are they coming up in areas where there's so little waste, but they're accepting waste from areas with high waste? Actually, I think I forgot to mention one thing actually, is that this is not actually an RDF plant necessarily, it's an RDF production plant. So as you can see, it's not for burning, but it is used for the production of RDF. This bad smell comes from the drying out of the RDF before sending. And this company sends the RDF plant to the north area, where it's a much more rural community. It just so happens that here, this is where RDF is being produced. And I think the key point was that RDF causes problem whether at the stage of its production or at the stage of its usage. But yes, a lot of RDF waste burning plants are appearing at poorer communities, at more fringe communities, and they are accepting waste from the city, which is a big case of environmental injustice there.
Man, I feel like, what do you feel like the I guess you're getting support from Gaia and stuff like that, but is there other kind of international forums that are useful to help fight some of these things locally?
I think what is very interesting to me personally is the issue of possible of Basel Convention. The reason I bring up Basel is because I think there's an issue with possibilities of imports of plastic waste for burning. I have to be careful saying this because a lot of private groups in Thailand say that it's not possible. Thailand is not importing any waste from other places to be burned, but we are highly suspicious of that. And there's also arguments saying that with this rate of subsidies, government subsidies to RDF plants in Thailand, the demand for RDF would be so high, it would exceed the amount of waste inside the country. So at that point, there would be profits to be made to import waste from other countries to be use here, and that totally destroys the whole circular economy idea if we have to actually bring waste inside the country from developed nations. The issue that I want to bring up with Basel in particular is because there's no, I think there's no clear customs code for RDF. That doesn't seem to be so. So that's a big loophole. We cannot track the import of RDF from other countries, and we cannot track the RDF inside Thailand either, because as I mentioned, there's no definition. RDF for us is almost like a black box that is just kind of contain all kind of toxic stuff, and we cannot track, test, or do anything about it.
Wow, okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to open up now to I guess the whole panel for questions from the audience. We do have one. So any speakers that feel like answering this, jump in. What is the panel's view on dealing with some problematic materials that are hard to recycle, such as highly contaminated plastic, medical waste, composite materials, etc.? What do you think is overall better, landfill, waste to energy, or export? Any other possible solutions? There's quite a lot to unpack in that question. Who would like to go first? I feel like Jane might have had a go at answering it in the chat. You're muted, but that would be great.
The three options put forward are all disposal options.
Yeah.
Landfill, incineration, or export. Neither are solutions. The only solution to materials that are composite or hazardous and toxic is to redesign them for safe circularity. So the first thing to do is to, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, we have to take our waste and we have to look at it, and we have to recognise it as a design failure. We have to find a way of making what we need without contaminating the planet and human health in the process for future generations. So the first thing to do is to not make it, to look at it, redesign it. But, you know, the medical sector is a really problematic one. But medical waste incineration is still used widely, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, you know, I'm reminded of the awesome work that they do in the Himalayas. Magas and will know, amazing deconstruction. And where there's a will, there's a way. But, you know, in Western countries where we don't like to touch our waste and we don't like people handling it and we don't like to really get down into the nitty gritty of our waste and find innovative ways to reuse and recycle it, there are other technologies. And there are other hazardous waste technologies, as I mentioned, gas-based chemical reduction is one. But there's a company called Sanitec that basically takes medical waste and puts it into the machine and autoclaves it. So the first thing they do is they stabilize all the biological materials and render it sanitized, so that then you can touch it and use it, right? It's not full of blood and guts and wee and poo and all the other things that end up in the medical waste stream. Then what you end up basically with is a kind of flock, but it's a benign flock, and that would be safe to apply for other uses. You can either use it as you can either put it in landfill safely and it's not going to leach toxic chemicals or generate methane, right? This is why we need to look at really dedicated pre-treatment of materials to render it benign, to stop it generating methane, to make it sanitized, because then you can do other things with it. The Sanitec, I know, is used quite extensively in the US. I think there's even plants in Australia. There are other solutions, but disposal is always the last option, and it's definitely the case that we need to address the problems with medical waste and its absolute saturation with plastic. I mean, the days of having a fabric curtain at your bed or everything's been plasticized in the medical sector. And that's because, again, the plastics industry is the fossil fuel industry. They're looking for new uses all the time. They're flooding our materials production systems and every aspect of our society with plastic. And now we face an existential crisis. We're breathing in plastic particles. Our babies are being born pre-polluted with plastics and chemicals. Serious, serious issues. I don't want to be talking about the problem at the waste end. I want to be talking about the problem at the front end where we can actually fix it, because by the time it gets into the waste stream, it's too late. We've got a problem. So the solution to any waste problem is at the front end, not at the back end. But you know, there are technologies and there are solutions for medical waste. Composite materials, maybe it's time to stop making them.
I guess, do you guys have anything else to add? Yeah, I guess you've put a link in with probably all sorts of ideas.
So that is link in terms of the healthcare waste management. So there is a group called Healthcare Without Harm, which is promoting green hospitals and also non-incineration waste management. So there's a lot of resources available. Yeah. Also Gaia also has a lot of resources, and IPEN. So we are all members of these groups.
It's one of the things that is so amazing about the problem with waste that it strikes me so often, is it's happened so quickly. Like just a couple of generations ago, it was so normal to reuse things and build things to last, and we've shifted, we've gone so far, but that it kind of, I mean, that's horrific, and it also gives me this little bit of hope that it could also go back. Yeah. What about you? Have you got anything else you'd like to add?
Maybe just shortly that Thailand did burn a lot of medical waste during the COVID-19 pandemic. As it turned out, it doesn't really, the issue of it is that because of the lack of waste management protocol, then more medical waste comes up and the burning just keeps going on. But there's no, again, like Jane said, you don't focus on this start, then it doesn't solve the problem sustainably. And now we're still facing a lot of problems.
Yeah. Are there any other questions from the audience to all of the panelists, or one of the panelists in particular? You could come online and ask them. Otherwise, we'll start to wrap up, I think. Going once. Oh, somebody's just put a big thing in it. Oh, okay. I'm going to read it, Jonathan. These are shocking. This information experience is shocking and deeply disturbing. Such a good reminder for us to be aware of the global scenario and to challenge this industry and their misinformation in New Zealand. Well done for putting the seminar together. The tactics of the waste to energy industry appear so corrupt and wrong. They seem no better than a bunch of international criminals which profit from harming people and polluting communities. Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, okay. Well, any last chances, you can still do it, but I will just try and summarize. I think we've heard some amazing stories, some kind of shocking and horrific stories from around the Asia Pacific region. I mean, the video from Europe was interesting because I think it was quite had some really positive things in it. Some lessons have been learned in Europe, and there seems to be a shift in direction, and you know, that's good. But yeah, from Malaysia, Australia, and Thailand, I think really powerful to hear from you guys, the communities that are fighting these things, the successes you've had, the challenges that still exist. I think there is lots to learn. I think some of the things that have come up about the who's behind all this, where the profits are going, following the money is really, really interesting and needs a good focus, because I imagine that what's happening in New Zealand is linked to what's happening in other places too. I think that we heard some stuff about the importance of climate change and climate action and the interaction that waste to energy technologies are having in that space. So they are contributing, I think, emissions, and also kind of tying us into a linear economy, which is going to have direct negative climate impacts. And so the potential for positive climate action is also to oppose waste to energy incineration. So yeah, thank you all very much. I'm going to end how we started with a karakia. just to kind of close off the space and yeah, just acknowledge especially your speakers. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. We in New Zealand really appreciate you making the time to join us. Thank you so, so much. And I hope that we get to talk to you again soon. Okay, he karakia tēnei. I will end with unuhia. So unuhia, unuhia. Unuhia ki urutapu nui, kia wātea, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana me te wairua i te ara tangata. Koia rā e rongo, whakairia ake ki runga, tūturu whakamawa ki a tina, haumie hui e, tae ki e. So this is really just encouraging you to draw on the sacred spirits and to go clear and free into the next thing that you need to do. Thank you all very much. See you later. Bye.